Hey guys, Heather Boyd here and welcome to my very first tutorial on my new art channel. This video is dedicated to Amanda. She was one of the winners in the 10-day wire bracelet making challenge up over on my other channel, and I had sent her some alcohol inks to experiment with on Yupo paper, so I wanted to do a little demo video for her to show her how to use them. Also, I wanted to give Amanda a big thank you because she was my very first subscriber on this new channel. So today I'm going to experiment with these alcohol-based inks called Piñata. And yes, so they're all alcohol-based, and they, just a little pre-warning, they're a little bit smelly, but they're really fun to work with. You can get other kinds of inks as well, more water-based inks, but these are fun because the alcohol-based inks they dry really fast and they're very highly pigmented. They're very bright and they work really well on a hard surface, so you can paint on glass, metal, plastic, ceramics, stone, leather, even polymer clay. And today we're going to paint on Yupo paper. So Yupo paper is super interesting. I mentioned it in a previous video. It's basically a synthetic, tree-free, super smooth plastic paper. It's extruded from polypropylene pellets. It's recyclable, it's waterproof, it's non-porous, so your inks are not going to sink into the paper like they do with watercolor. And it really holds the ink very sharply, like it's very precise lines, very sharp colors. It feels like plastic, but it's durable and it's flexible. You can't tear it. It's not like paper that you can rip, and you can wipe it clean, so you can clean it off. It comes in white. This is the white one, or you can also buy a translucent one. And the fun thing about this is once it's painted, you can put it in a frame, you could use it for scrapbooking, and you can put it in a card. Like, for example, the samples that I made when I first received these inks, I'd never used them before, so I made these really beautiful, very abstract pieces. So I just played around with it. That's what we're going to do today. So I just played around with the different inks. This one's super bright colors, and then this is fun. There's a lot of metallic colors in it as well. And then what you can do when you're done is you can just get a blank card. This is from Michael's, and just stick it on the card. I'll just take the envelope out. You don't need to see that, but you'll see how it makes such a beautiful card, like in the different, and this cardstock comes in different colors, so you can choose what color you want for your card, and they just make really interesting designs just on their own. This almost looks like a little heart in there. So what you're going to need to do this project are your alcohol-based inks. Like I said, if you don't like the smell, if you don't like the idea of using these strong smelling inks, you can get water-based inks, and basically a lot of the techniques will be the same. You can use this rubbing alcohol just to sort of make little patterns and textures and dilute it. The only trouble with the rubbing alcohol is it makes it a little, like, it makes it more matte, so you can actually buy extenders that go with these inks, so they'll stay nice and shiny. This kind of dilutes the ink a little bit and will dullen it up, but it makes some really nice effects. So you're going to use brushes, you can use sponges, I'm going to put some alcohol in this little dropper. You can, put drops on it, and I'm even going to experiment with some coarse salt, which I use for watercolor as well. So to get started, I'm actually going to tape one of the papers down to show you the difference. So you can use masking tape. I do this with my watercolor paintings because it gives them a nice little border. You actually don't have to do it with the Yupo paper, because the reason I do it with the watercolor paper is because when it gets wet, it stretches out of shape, and then if you tape it down, it'll go back to its original shape once it's dry. Now, you don't really have the same problem with the Yupo because it's not absorbent, but just for fun, I'm going to try taping down the paper just to give it a bit of a border around the outside. And I will be doing lots of tutorials on this new channel for watercolor, drawing, all kinds of different techniques. If you have any requests, let me know. The only thing I don't really enjoy doing is clay because I don't like the feel of it on my hands, but I'll be doing a lot of painting and drawing on this channel. So here's one already set up, and then another one we'll just do the plain paper, and I'll show you the difference between the two. So what you want to do also is just you'll have your inks nearby. I'll bring them over here so you guys can see them. We have some that are metallic. There's one that's white. This is the only one that's opaque. The rest of them are transparent. Here's another metallic one and another metallic one there. So we've got all those ready. I'm going to have the salt ready over here in case I want to use it. And then you can have a little palette, your brushes, and a sponge. And I'm going to put a bit of alcohol in a little shot glass here, not to be mistaken for an actual shot glass. We'll just we probably don't need that much, so I'm going to put that much in there, and then I'm going to put a little bit in this little dropper bottle. I'll just bring it to the side here, and I might or might not use this. You can also just use a paintbrush. So those are all ready, and then you'll also want either paper towel or a cloth. I just usually use an old towel that I've cut up. I reuse that. So then what you want to do is you can either put it on your palette or you could put it directly on the paper. So I think we're just going to play. I'm just going to show you guys how this stuff works. So there's different colors. So here's a bright pink. And we're just going to start by putting a few drops in there to show you how it goes. And we're just going to go around. I'm not going to worry too much, about a technique right now. I just want to show you guys how these inks work. You'll see already they're sort of spreading out a little bit, which is really interesting. This is a super bright color. And then we're just going to do some more around here. Just put a bunch around here, and then we're going to do some yellow. I'm just putting the lids back as I go. I just don't want them to spill. And then we're going to just go down there. And it probably is going to look a little funny at first because, there's no real, you don't really have a design in mind. But as you play with them, you're going to see they're going to get like more and more really interesting to work with. So we're just going to do a little bit more. Now I see my table's a little bit on a slant, so I'm going to have to probably prop it up on one end so all my ink doesn't run to one side. So that's another thing to keep in mind. You don't want to be on a surface that's kind of slanted one way or whatever. Yeah, I can definitely see these are kind of going down a little bit. So what I can do is just get something to prop up that side of my board, just so it's more flat. So now I'm just going to show you what you can do. You can go ahead and get a brush. I'm going to get maybe a smaller brush. And then if you dip the brush in the alcohol and then you just bring it around, you'll see it does some interesting kinds of things. You can just play around with it. We're just going to go around. And like I said, this kind of dilutes the paint a little bit, but you'll see it gives some really interesting types of effects. And so the other thing you can do is actually take a sponge and you can make some interesting patterns on there, interesting textures, just overlapping. It makes it really cool. Like there's really a lot that you can do with this. You could even get bubble wrap and put bubble wrap on it. And I think for this one, I'm just going to play. We're going to just kind of go all over, just like that. And then I'm just going to move that one to the side. If you want to see what the alcohol does, if you just take the alcohol and put a little drop on there, it just kind of pushes the ink out and it gives it a really interesting effect. So you can just do some drops. You can also do this with your paintbrush if you want to just get a little bit of alcohol on your paintbrush. It's kind of psychedelic. It's really interesting. So it's just kind of spreading out the inks like that. And then you want to go for your metallic ones. So we have some metallic inks here. We're just going to go in there. There we go. So it makes some really interesting, fun effects. And it's almost like sort of Russian roulette, like a lottery. Sometimes you don't know how it's going to go, how it's going to turn out. The metallic ones, I've noticed that sometimes they get a little plugs, so you just have to like wipe the end a little bit and then just go for it. You know, just have fun. Just put your, you know, metallics in there as you like them. And the thing about this too is it's never lost. Like if you decide to change your mind, you don't like the way it's looking, you can definitely wipe it down and pull it off. I'll show you that after as well. So we're just going to put a little couple other brassy ones in there. So there's that. And the other thing I wanted to try that, but really you have to do this while it's wet, is to take, if you take a little bit of the salt and you just put it in there. I don't know how well it's going to work with this, but when I do watercolor, if you put the salt on, what it does, it kind of like soaks up a bit of the color. So it actually like soaks up the color. So when it's dry, you remove it and it's going to make an interesting texture. So now, for example, if you want to see how it looks, if you pull some color up, you're just going to dip your brush in the alcohol. And then you can just go around and like play around with it a little bit and see it's just going to start to remove some of the color a little bit. So I'll just take my cloth, and then if you want to like pull some color up, you can definitely do that. And you can get even a piece of the sponge. You can get a Q-tip if you want and just play around with pulling up some color and stuff. So there's lots that you can do with this. You can just kind of play around with it, spread it around a little bit. And there are also tutorials online that you can find out other techniques of things to do with the inks and stuff. So what I'm going to do with that one, I'm just going to leave it. I'm going to let it dry, and then I'm going to start this one. So for this one, I'm not going to tape it down. I'm just going to play around with it, and I'm going to go ahead and just go directly on the paper with this and just kind of do lines like that. So you can just go and do some interesting lines, play around with it, and then you could kind of blend the colors a little bit. Just go around and around. Yeah, and just for the first times you're doing it, I would just play around with it. I wouldn't worry too much about perfection, about like creating something realistic. You can just use this too as a background, and then you can go over top and paint something on top. Like it would be really cool to do like a kind of a landscape thing, and then you go in after and do like a tree or something like that. It could be really cool. So I'm just going to go around, just around like that, and play around with it. And then I'll show you after. We can also put some on a palette and go from there. So we're just going to do some lines for now. This one seems a little less opaque than the other ones. I'm not quite sure why that would be, but that's some of the colors are slightly different. So, and then here's one that's more like a pearly one, not so much metallic, but more kind of pearly type of thing. So that's really cool. Bring that in here and around here. Yeah, the pearly ones, the metallic ones do get a little bit stuck in the end sometimes, but they're not too bad. So now let's get some other metallics. We're going to go in there. Same thing, if your metallics get a little stuck, just go ahead and wipe the end and shake it out a little bit. So we can go in like this, wipe this a bit more. Yeah, go in like this. And then if you do want to put some on a palette, you can definitely do that too. We'll bring the palette over here, And I'll just move this one over so you can see here. So we're going to bring the palette over here, and then you can squeeze some colors onto the palette. The thing you have to keep in mind, it dries very, very quickly. So you'll just want to work quickly, really. And then you can just go in and use it more like paint, you know, just around like that. Blend your colors. And then bring some pink in there, play around with it. And then if you want to bring some alcohol in there, I would recommend using the extender, but because I don't have the extender, I'm just playing with the alcohol for now. Just bring it in, and then bring that one in here. And we're going to try just like spreading the alcohol first, and then let's just see what happens if we put the paint on top of the alcohol. See, it makes an interesting kind of effect there. So we're going to bring that down. And if you like experimenting, these inks are amazing. There's a lot of different things you can do with them. You'll see when you put it on the alcohol, it's not as intense. When you put it straight on the paper, it's super bright. And then when you put it on the alcohol, it's more diluted for sure. So we're just going to go through and put lots and lots of the color on there. Just play around with it. It's getting to be a bit of a mess, but it's really, really fun. I love this stuff. And look, it's almost like organic. It just kind of bleeds out like that. Super, super funky. And then what you can do is just sort of do an interesting kind of base. And then after that, you can go in with your metallics, and it's going to make it look really interesting. I like the intensity of the colors. I find them really interesting. One of the ones that I did before, I liked that it got like kind of like really very intense. Like look at some of these really super bright areas too. I find them so beautiful, so interesting. And then we're just going to go in with a couple of these. And then you want to lighten it up in some places with some yellow too. And the other thing you can do is do like a large kind of piece. And then you can just cut out the areas that you like the best. So often I like to do that as well. Like I'll do a large abstract piece. And then I'll go in after and I'll just pull out the areas that I really like. So like I'll just cut out a piece or something like that. So look at this, like this one got super intense, and then I could definitely like trim it in different ways. And look at how the colors are changing. It's like magic. They're just blending together. They're moving out. They're like making little textures. So interesting. Yeah, I find them so, so interesting. So now let's see what happens if we put a little bit of alcohol in there, just to see if it changes it up. Like when it gets like super intense like that, you almost want to let it dry a little bit, but we'll just try to put a little alcohol in there to see what happens, play around with it. And then when it's dry, we can go in with our metallics and add a little bit, or when it's almost dry. You don't need it to be fully dry, but look at how interesting that is. It just pushes out the color. So cool. I could do this all day. It's so interesting. Really, really fun. Now it's getting a little dark, a little muddy, but that's something that you're going to learn as you go. Like this to me almost looks like stained glass. I find that super interesting. So now let's get some more colors. You can also blow dry it. You can get a blow dryer. You can, if you blow on it, it can push the colors as well. You could get a straw. You can do all kinds of things with it for sure. And then we could go in again with our sponge and just lift up some colors like that. Okay, so you might want to like twist your sponge as you go. You might want to have several sponges ready. So like these, once it gets saturated, you want to get other ones ready, because that way you can remove some of the color. And I would recommend wearing gloves. I'm not wearing gloves right now, but I should be wearing gloves because it stains for sure. So you want to wear gloves. You want to work in a well-ventilated area, and it does smell a little strong. So this is something that you're going to discover along the way. Very interesting. So now let's go ahead and get some colors. I'm going to do more of the copper color for this one. So we're just going to do some little bits of copper. I'm going to shake this up again. I'll just shake it up and make sure you wipe the ends so that it's not plugged up. And now you can go in with your metallics. Okay, we'll just make it. If you see any white spots, that might be a good area to stick your metallics on there. And you can even like bring it over a little bit if you have to. Like if you don't like those white areas, just kind of like fill them up a little bit. So we can just like go over these areas a bit, so they're not. Sometimes the white areas are a little distracting. So we're just gonna go like that. This looks like sort of a space thing. Like I find it very interesting. And I have just touched the surface of this technique because honestly, I've only watched 1 or 2 tutorials, and you know, kind of going with what they put on their packaging. So I think there's a lot you can do with this. I think it's definitely, you know, has a lot of potential. You could even use this for jewelry making. You could paint on glass, you could paint on surfaces, and the thing about it, it makes these beautiful, beautiful, intense colors. So you might want to go in again and add, say, a little bit more yellow or something. My yellow's got a little bit covered up a bit, but we're just going to go in and maybe add a little bit more yellow here and there, maybe towards the side. Like if you do want to end up covering the whole thing, because up here I put some alcohol, it got a little bit dulled up, so we can go ahead and add like little bits more yellow and stuff too. So maybe even down here too. Even though I'm going to probably trim it, I'd like the idea of like just brightening it up a bit. This is starting to look very organic. It's starting to look like almost like an under the sea type of thing, which is very interesting. And yeah, I'll definitely trim it because there's some areas that I want to trim. But this is gorgeous. Like, I thought it was a lost cause, and now I'm really loving it. So that's the thing about this technique. You just don't know. So you know what? Sometimes your heart just says stop. So I think I'm just going to do one more. I'm just going to stop now. I think it's beautiful. I'm going to let them dry, and then probably this one is almost dry by now. It's still a little bit shiny, so I'm going to let them dry, and then I'm going to peel off the tape. So now they're almost dry. I blow dried them a little bit, and just a heads up, the salt actually didn't work. This is a sampler. When I teach watercolor painting, I always do a little sampler with my students, and this is what the salt effect looks like when you do it on watercolor paper. It makes these nice little speckles, but because the Yupo paper is not absorbent, you don't get that same kind of texture. And even the alcohol, when you drop it on watercolor paper, it makes more like a bullseye kind of texture. So this will be more techniques for a different video to teach you how to do watercolor. So comment below if you want to learn how to do watercolor. I have some fun projects for that. And then just to remove the tape on the piece. Okay, so this is another fail. Slightly fail. Yeah, this doesn't work either, because when you tape down the watercolor paper, the paint doesn't leak underneath the tape. But look at how that's like gone underneath the tape into the borders. So I would say that is A, not necessary, because you don't need to hold the shape of the paper, and B, it actually looks pretty bad because it doesn't really look like a border at all. So this is, you know, not terrible, but definitely not necessary to tape down the paper. But so this is just to show you the two different pieces. This is the one that I did first, and I just kind of, you know, randomly put some colors and blended them. This one I kept building the colors more and more, so it's quite a bit darker. So just to show you, if you put it on a greeting card, you know, the color of the card always brings out the colors in the piece. The other thing you could do is crop it how you like. So it's still a little bit wet. I have to be careful. But say you decide you just want to use this part of the piece, you can just like get a couple of papers, and then you can decide, you know, which part of the piece you want to keep. depending like where you want to crop it. That's like really interesting that you can do with this. If you want to make a square, if you want to make like a bookmark, there's all kinds of things you can do with that. So this is a piece, or you might want to cut out pieces and put it in a collage and a scrapbook. Sky is the limit. So there's that one. And then this one turned out to be quite a bit darker. Looks like an under the sea thing. So you could put this on here. I would trim around the outside when it's dry, so it looks a little more finished. You could put like, what would be really cool, we can hop over to the wire channel and make like a little wire fish and stick it on there. So really, maybe I'll do that, and then I'll link back to this video. So that's pretty well it for the intro to the alcohol inks and the Yupo papers. So if you have any questions, put them in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe to the channel and click the notification bell to be notified when I post another video and when I go live.